I saw this post on X earlier today from Chris Gore over at Film Threat, and it really got me thinking about the current state of Hollywood, because this is pretty much something that I've been saying for some time now. This is what he said on X. You could make 100 Terrifier 3s for the cost of one Joker Folie adieu. Hollywood has lost the plot. Hollywood is out of touch with audiences and fans. Hollywood is in decline. Prepare for an indie film revolution. Hashtag Terrifier 3. Hashtag Joker Folie adieu. Hashtag Joker 2. I really like what he's saying here with this one, because like I was saying before, this is something that I've been saying for quite some time, in that it's not that entirely that Hollywood is out of touch with audiences, although I do believe that's the case. I think for the most part, with what they're doing in their current practice with many of their major releases, is that they're just incapable of producing movies that a lot of people really like. Because when you're spending hundreds of millions of dollars on a film, then you have to try to make something that appeases a mass audience, versus what we saw with Terrifier 3, which is, it's not really the type of movies that I watch, because I don't normally like the gore heavy horror movies, but there are a lot of people who do like these type of movies, and there is an audience for that. And because they spent so little on that movie, they can actually make something for that particular audience. And as a result, they're going to show up for that. Compare that with what we saw with Joker 2, where they spent so much money on that movie. They were trying to appease everyone. And as a result, they end up appeasing no one. We got this article from Deadline talking about the box office results of this last weekend. Clown versus Clown. Terrifier 3 shows teeth with 18 million plus as Joker 2 posts record drop for DC character pick. That's pretty devastating for Joker 2 having such a huge decline. I pretty much anticipated this was going to happen. I said before talking about Joker Folie adieu that I think because they were going a different approach for this movie, a lot of people were taking a wait and see mentality when it comes to it. I was kind of under that umbrella right there, where I wasn't entirely put off by the concept of it making being a musical, but I wasn't sold on it either. So I was waiting to hear word of mouth from people I trust who are going to go see it and see what they thought first before I decided to check it out. Well, lo and behold, it turned out a lot of people didn't like it. So I was like, okay, I guess I won't see it after all. Meanwhile, if people actually had good word of mouth, then I probably would have checked it out. So I think that was kind of general audiences, where that's why we had such a low opening weekend for Joker 2. But if it had good word of mouth, then I think it would have had a pretty strong hold the second weekend. But it turns out that's not the case. Meanwhile, Terrifier 3 has a fairly strong opening for it, because the niche fan base for this type of movie knows what they were getting into when they went to watch the movie. In one of the year's second best triumphs for indie genre cinema after Neon's Longlegs, Cineverse's under $5 million investment Terrifier 3 is screaming to an estimated $18.3 million plus 3-day after an $8.2 million Friday and $5.9 million Saturday. And they say that it's a $5 million investment. I think that's with marketing and distribution costs as well, because the reported production budget for this movie is just around $2 million. That's why Chris Gore said that you could have made 100 Terrifier 3s for the cost of one Joker Folie adieu, because that budget was reported to be around $200 million. Terrifier 2 developed quite the cult following in its theatrical and post-theatrical, and what's going on here with Terrifier 3 is one of the oldest tricks in the Hollywood rulebook, noticing the popularity of IP and the home ancillaries of one sequel and doubling down on the next installment. Read Austin Powers 1 and 2 and John Wick 1 and 2. Now, one might come to the conclusion that Joker 2 is a better off movie because it made more money at the box office, not take into account how much studios are actually spending on these movies, because even though a lot of Hollywood studios will just try to boast about how much they're making at the box office, behind the scenes, you know, they're thinking about their own initial investment, because, I mean, it is a business after all. And if they're actually losing money producing stuff, then they probably should reconsider. And you can just tell that they're probably looking at movies like Terrifier 3 and seeing how much they're actually able to make on how little. And they're probably thinking to themselves, how can we get into this business where we have these huge returns on our investments? Because right now, Terrifier 3, it's looking like it's making 7 times its budget back during its opening weekend alone. Meanwhile, Joker Folie during its opening weekend, it made around half of its budget, and that's globally. And they probably need to make around 2.5 at a minimum, most likely around 3.5 times its production budget in order to break even on this. So there's no way they're going to be getting that 7 times investment on their budget, especially, I mean, even going into it before we heard any negative reviews for that, there was no chance that it was actually going to be making that type of money on that movie. But they spent so much on it, that's kind of what it was required to. But something like Terrifier 3, it's able to achieve that because it's catering to a niche audience that really likes horror movies, particularly gory horror movies. Among the reasons why people went to this clown movie versus the other one on the marquee, 52% said it was part of a genre they love, while 40% said Terrifier 3 is part of a franchise they love. The article goes on to say that Joker Folie had an 82% drop during its second weekend, which means anyone who was remotely interested in watching this movie or curious about it, willing to give it a shot, already watched it during this opening weekend. We saw that was pretty small. And then that's essentially pretty much everyone else is done with this movie at this time frame. And the final result probably going to be Warner Brothers losing tens of millions of dollars on this. And that's pretty devastating for it, all things considered. Now, this is why I was getting to the idea that movie studios should be reducing the budget, because when you reduce the budget of the movie, then suddenly there's no longer a burden by the filmmaker and by the studio to try to make something that appeases everyone. I think of it like this. Imagine you had to make a meal for 10 different people. You could either make one meal for everyone and you're just hoping that it's something that would be okay with everyone, because it's pretty unlikely to make something so good that everyone's just going to love it. You're probably going to make something that maybe at best everyone is just likes it. You might have some that some people just love it, other people hate it, other people are just kind of all right. Now imagine you also had to do that, but instead of making one meal for 10 people, you're making 10 different meals for 10 people, so you can cater it to each individual person. And I think that's something that a lot of Hollywood studios should be doing. Instead of spending so much money on their movies and hoping that they can appease everyone with it, they should be instead looking to spend less money on individual movies. That way you can give the creative control in the hands of the filmmakers and the writers. They can make something that may not appease everyone or be for everyone, but it doesn't have to be. It just has to appease the group that it's trying to make it for. And as a result, they can achieve some success with that. We've seen other studios like Blumhouse, for instance, they found a niche for themselves doing just that, making low budget horror movies. And while a lot of people don't necessarily like their movies, they still make money for the studio and they can continue making them. And every once in a while, they make a movie that's just fantastic out there and they can continue going with that. Meanwhile, you get some of these major studios, Warner Brothers, for instance, with Joker 2. We see that all the time with Disney, like even their TV shows like The Acolyte, for instance. I've said talking about that one that there's people who really love that show, and I don't have a problem if people like that show, but just understand that Disney spent so much money on that show that it had to appeal to everyone in order for it to be reasonable for them to renew it for a second season. And as a result, they couldn't do that. Now, if they made it for a significantly lower budget, then maybe they can justify having it around, but they didn't. So that's why it failed. They're also talking about Agatha all along and saying that that's a success for them because reportedly, we haven't had any confirmation on this, but reportedly the budget was extremely low for it. So they don't have to have huge viewership in order to justify keeping it around or consider it a success. And I'm okay with that too. Again, that show's not for me, but it doesn't have to be for me because I'm not the target audience for that. And I think this is something, and this is just kind of an example of what Hollywood studios should be doing from now on, or at least for the interim period right now while things are going pretty bad for them. They should just be, making money or making movies at a lower budget like this so they can actually get some return on their investment. And every once in a while, you can have those big tentpole features. I mean, that used to be the norm where they would have just regular movies. And then every once in a while you have those big budget blockbuster movies, but they made so much money on those in the past. It's basically just grand slams for them. So they've been swinging for the fences each time, but every movie you put out can't be a blockbuster movie like that. People just aren't going to go see the movies and those type of numbers. So you have to kind of dial it back a little bit. And until Hollywood starts learning that, they're going to continue to lose revenue to independent movies like this. So I think they should embrace the independent model. But word is, though, that a lot of these studios don't want to go back like that. They don't want to start, I don't know, they consider that reducing themselves or somehow lesser to go back and try to make cheaper movies on a low budget like this. But honestly, that's probably what they need to do if they want to continue to, unless they just are happy to go down with the ship. But let me know what you think about all this in the comment section below. Do you think this is kind of an example of what Hollywood should do? Just kind of make cheaper movies that caters to niche audiences and actually make money that way? Or should they continue on just hoping that they can have one blockbuster that offset the loss of all their other movies that have been failing? Comment below. And if you haven't already, make sure you click that subscribe button if you want to stay up to date with the latest entertainment news. And don't forget to click that like button and share this video out there with your friends because it really helps out with the channel. Thank you.